I abducted children, slicing open their bodies and taking pleasure in the sight of their organs. Welcome to my grim world. I am Baron Gilles de Rais. I belong to one of the most powerful families in France and was one of the most savage serial killers of all time. I was born in 1404. After the premature death of my parents, I inherited a vast fortune, affording me considerable financial freedom. At a mere 16, I joined the war and later became a hero in the fateful Battle of Orléans, next to Joan of Arc. I was now 26 years old, a commander of an army, owner of extensive lands, and a celebrated hero of the 100 Years' War. In addition, I owned several castles and estates, but my murderous desire was not quenched in these dark times. I began to kill, not on the battlefield, but behind the walls of my castles and estates, not for the sake of war, but for sheer pleasure. I kidnapped young peasant boys from the region, brought them to my castle, abused, tortured, and killed them in a brutal way. If I couldn't find any boys, I would also turn to girls. I had their bodies gruesomely opened, taking pleasure in the sight of their twitching organs. Sometimes, I would sit on the bellies of the children because it excited me to watch them die. And when the children were dead, I would kiss them, then decapitate them with a blade, and hang their most beautiful heads and limbs on display, sometimes making up the heads and organizing macabre competitions. Thanks to my high social rank, I was able to follow my murderous instincts unhindered for 8 years from 1432 to 1440. Already 140 children had fallen to my deadly pleasure. But in May 1440, I made a crucial mistake. I stormed a church and abducted a priest who was also a local and treasurer of Duke John V of Brittany. With this assault, I made an enemy of the Bishop of Nantes, who initiated a procedure for heresy. Under threat of torture, I confessed to 140 pleasure murders, demon summoning, and sodomy. However, the real number is likely much higher. On October 26, 1440, I was hung in front of a massive crowd in Nantes, along with 2 of my accomplices. Believing that I had made enough atonement through my confession, I died with the conviction that I would ascend to paradise.
I was dismembered and turned into TV furniture by my son. My name is William Spiller, and this is my horrifying story. At the time of the incident, I worked as a taxi driver and lived with my 28-year-old son, Nathan Robinson, in an apartment in Bournemouth, England. We often had arguments as my son still lived under my roof without taking care of his own expenses. He owed me a substantial sum of £36,000. On May 16, 2013, we had another intense argument, but this one went beyond imagination. In a fit of madness, Nathan killed me and armed himself with a utility knife and 2 small hacksaws to meticulously dismember my heavily built body. The horror didn't end there. He then stored my body parts in plastic storage boxes, stacking them to create a TV furniture piece. He even placed my head in a desk drawer. In the afternoon, my downstairs neighbor noticed pink liquid dripping from the ceiling, a mix of my blood and a cleaning product. Having also heard our argument, the neighbor came upstairs and knocked on our door. Nathan calmly answered, assuring that everything was fine and it was merely a dispute. Later, my son stole £8,000 from me and made a to-do list to avoid arousing suspicion about my death. He paid the rent, rented DIY equipment, and responded to my text messages. In a cruel twist of fate, he even received the DVD Say 7 as a gift shortly afterward. Nathan continued to live his life as if nothing had happened, traveling, meeting people, and going out with friends. It was only a month later that my remains were discovered when one of my colleagues grew concerned about my absence. My girlfriend, Glenys Molino, with whom I had been in a relationship for 2 years, also became worried about not receiving any text messages from me and believed I was with a friend in the West Midlands County. The police then arrived at my apartment and were hit by the overwhelming smell and the presence of numerous flies. They subsequently went to Nathan's mother's house, where he was staying, in Birmingham. My son asked if it was a joke, but eventually confessed to the murder, claiming he was not in a normal state of mind at the time of the act. However, experts had conflicting opinions as he displayed a level of consciousness about his actions, particularly in creating an illusion of me being alive. Nathan's trial took place in 2014, and he was sentenced to life imprisonment.
I was placed in a microwave and subjected to intense heat by my own mother. My name is Paris Tally. The day that changed my fate is one I will never forget, even though it was only my 28th day of life. I remember the argument between my mother and her boyfriend, Terrell. They were shouting at each other, and I could feel the anger in the room. Suddenly, my mother's hands were on me, gripping me tightly. I felt fear for the first time in my short life. Then, the next thing I knew, I was in a dark, cramped space. It was hot and I couldn't breathe properly. I could feel my little body burning up, and I cried out for my mother, but she didn't come. The heat was unbearable. It felt like an eternity before the microwave finally stopped. I was dazed and confused, but I knew something was terribly wrong. My body was on fire, and I couldn't move. When my mother finally took me out of the microwave, I was so relieved, but it was short-lived, as she put me on a table and left me there, alone. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew that I was in pain. I could feel my tiny body shutting down. The next day, I woke up to find myself cold and stiff. I had burn marks all over my body, and I knew that I was no longer alive. My life had been cut short by the very person who was supposed to love and protect me. Looking back, I can't help but wonder what my life could have been like if my mother hadn't been consumed by anger and violence. I could have grown up to be anything I wanted to be, but instead, my life was cut short before it even had a chance to begin.